Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are joining us from today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to join this webinar for the Green Accountability Platform on enhancing transparency, inclusion, and accountability in climate finance, where we'll unpack some of the lessons coming out of the Green Accountability Platform, which has been running since October 2024 and is now coming to its ending period. And through this work, we've uncovered a lot of lessons and learned a lot from different civil society organizations that we have been supporting through this project. And the intention of this webinar today is to unpack some of those case studies and some of those lessons and have a discussion around how we can scale this work forward. So by way of introduction, my name is Hannah Sack, and I work for SouthSouthNorth, an organization based in Cape Town. And we are working as part of a consortium on this project. And through this work, have uncovered some really important lessons and opportunities to strengthen the role of civil society actors within the climate finance decision-making space. And the intention today of this webinar, as I've said, is to highlight some of those important case studies. But through this work also is to highlight some of the really rich publications that are coming out of this work. So we have developed a case study booklet as well as a policy brief, which unpacks some key recommendations for multiple different stakeholder groups, ranging from national governments to multilateral institutions. And also we've done a deep dive into some of the work of these civil society organizations spanning across 5 different countries from Bangladesh, Brazil, Cameroon, Mexico, and Senegal. So please do access these publications with the QR code on the screen. Or also through the links that are posted in the chat. So just some webinar housekeeping rules before we get going. We do have interpretation for this webinar. We have interpretation services for Spanish, Portuguese, and French. So please do use the interpretation function and select the language that you'd like to listen in. And also a reminder to myself and everyone that is speaking during this webinar today to please speak slowly and clearly so that the interpreters can follow along. We also have a Q&A box. So while our presenters are speaking during the panel session, you are welcome to post questions in that Q&A box, and you're welcome to post it in your own language. I'll ask our interpreters with us today to please help with translation if needed. We might not be able to get to all the questions, so please do upvote on the questions that you would like to be answered so we can make sure that we do answer the ones that are the most popular. And we also will allow people to raise their hands and unmute themselves as well during the Q&A session. So if you'd like to pose a question directly to one of our speakers, you're also welcome to do that. But in the meantime, I do ask kindly that everyone please keep their microphones muted and cameras off while our presenters are speaking. And if there's any technical support needed during the webinar, please also just let our meeting support know in the chat, and they'll be able to assist you. So for those of you that are new to this work or haven't engaged with the platform, or for those of you that would like a reminder of what this project has been all about, so the Green Accountability Platform was implemented from October 2024 through to December 2025 and consisted of a consortium led by World Resources Institute, the Huairou Commission, and SouthSouthNorth. And this project has been funded through the World Bank's Global Partnership for Social Accountability, which is now running as CIVIC. So this work really tried to advance climate accountability in 5 project countries. So as I mentioned before, we were working in Bangladesh, Cameroon, Senegal, Brazil, and Mexico. And specifically what this project tried to do is to channel funding directly to 25 civil society organizations in these countries that were working on climate accountability agendas within their local contexts, really aiming to make climate finance processes and policy processes more transparent, participatory, and accountable. It also aimed to improve the impact and equity of climate finance by supporting the inclusion of marginalized communities in decision-making spaces and also providing CSO feedback into those climate finance spaces as well. It also aims to encourage collaboration with relevant government institutions. So, really trying to institutionalize relationships between civil society and government, and this spanned across different spheres. So, working at the subnational level and also at the national level as well. And then lastly, the platform also tried to consolidate learning, strategies, and tools that were shared among the 25 implementing CSOs across the 5 countries, but also more broadly, bringing in external partners that were working in the space to share lessons and convene through a community of practice. So importantly, the community of practice really tried to strengthen those relationships at the country level, but also externally as well, fostering a inclusive space to have these conversations and scale up innovative practices. And through this, we identified some really important themes, which have been explored at the country level by these different civil society organizations. And I think that this really sets the tone for the discussion today to unpack some of those lessons and successes that spanned across these 5 different countries. So what we noticed through this work was that a lot of these projects and a lot of work on climate accountability focuses firstly on enabling transparency, and by doing this aims to make data and information more accessible and more responsive to civil society needs. So through this work, we saw a lot of civil society organizations developing platforms and making information a lot more understandable and accessible to communities. Secondly, a lot of the work also focused on advancing advocacy and engagement channels for inclusive policy processes. So by working with marginalized communities and creating participatory governance processes, making spaces for discussions in policy spaces as well, this work really tried to bring those voices into the policy and climate finance decision-making spaces. And then lastly, a lot of this work on accountability has a direct focus on climate finance, looking at how we can increase those capabilities and raise awareness on what climate finance is and how it can be more inclusive and transparent. So we saw a lot of this work focused on methodologies for tracking climate finance and translating climate finance data and information into very accessible formats for the general public and for communities to then be able to use it to lobby for their needs. So that gives a bit of an overview around the platform and its intention. And today we're going to first open with some remarks from SouthSouthNorth's director, Josh Ogada. I'm then going to ask or hand over to Romy Chevalier, who led the development of these 2 publications, so the policy brief and the case studies. And she'll unpack a little bit of some of those lessons and what you can expect reading through those publications, also giving a bit of an overview as to which case studies are featured and the organizations that were part of this work. And then we'll dive into our panel today. So we've brought in some speakers that were implementing these projects on the ground in their local contexts. And we also have a colleague from the World Bank to share his perspectives as well. And I'll introduce these speakers when we open up for that panel session later. As I said, we will have a Q&A, so please do post your questions in the Q&A box and save your questions for then. And then we will close with Ali Rahim from the World Bank giving closing remarks to this webinar. So please do engage with the material. And yeah, we look forward to a really great discussion. And thank you all for being online. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Josh Ogada, Director at SouthSouthNorth, for opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you to all of you for joining. I know some of you are joining quite early in the morning. We hope that you have your coffee on hand, but we do appreciate working in different time zones means that convenience is not universal. But we are really grateful that there's a sense of the importance of the work that we are doing. Really good to see a lot of the collaborators we've worked with in the last year. We really appreciate the work, and I think this is a moment to sit down and take stock and understand the importance of the work that we've been doing, but also understand the increased urgency and importance of this work going forward. And I think going on the back of Hannah's few remarks and introduction to the work that we've been doing, it might be useful to take a bit of a step back and understand the global geopolitical and social tensions that make it even more important that the work that we do sees the light of day and continues. There's a need for increased accountability and transparency on climate finance. Even though this has been something that's been discussed for quite a while, we are not feeling that there's enough traction being made, and therefore no need for us to take our foot off the pedal. We are indeed facing a space where the heightened geopolitical tensions are causing countries to turn more competitive and protectionist in their strategies, all in the midst of a shrinking development finance landscape and the scramble for power that is currently happening. We're also seeing this play out in various contexts globally, from changing power dynamics. Obviously, the one that we don't need to state is obviously in the US and how they withdrawn from the Paris Agreement and a whole bunch of international multilateral bodies. We see the Russia-Ukraine war that continues to grind on, which obviously has impacts when it comes to energy sovereignty and leading to countries that have been primarily providers of this multinational aid to divert that funding away from aid and climate finance to energy sovereignty. We're also seeing changes in policies, foreign policies that result in many countries pulling back on their multilateral commitments. So not just the US, but other countries turning inward to focus more on domestic priorities. There is also a broad political shift to the right, which is occasioning and is occasioned by this as well. So all of these are things that are affecting us. And these changing dynamics have had significant effects not only on the availability of climate finance, but also on the quality and the affordability of the said finance. We've seen the last two COPs where discussions have centered around the need for an additional 1.3 trillion in finance to be mobilized by the year 2035. We are in 2026 right now, and we're finding that these commitments and the actual disbursements still continue to fall short, way below this target. The new collective quantified goal, which was agreed to in COP29, for example, has been met with much disappointment because it's fallen short of this target, with countries agreeing finally to mobilize just 300 billion by 2035, which is way less than what the original goal had envisioned. Specifically, finance for adaptation, which is essential for development in the global south, is serially underfunded and not channeled to where it's most needed, with less than 17% of global adaptation finance reaching local communities. According to the World Economic Forum as well, indigenous people safeguard approximately 80% of the world's biodiversity, but currently receive 1% of climate finance, which leads us to call into question how equitable and fair the current climate finance architecture truly is. So, in the face of all of this, what about green accountability? What can it do to right the ship and address some of these concerns that we're seeing? And it's understandable that while these conversations on availability and affordability of climate finance are important, we have seen less attention in recent years being placed on how this finance is channeled, how it's governed, and who has a say in the decisions regarding its disbursement. We are also seeing currently that there's a lack of consistent data where climate finance is flowing to and who makes the decision on where these flows end up. We have a couple of examples, like, for example, fewer than 20 countries have climate budget tagging systems in place, and only a few have a clear definition of what climate finance is. In addition to this, the availability of finance doesn't necessarily guarantee that it reaches communities who are actually facing the greatest risks to their safety, their livelihoods, and even their culture. Therefore, we can see that there's a strong need for us to assess the degree to which climate finance is currently managed with transparency, participatory decision-making, and accountability, just to ensure that it is truly inclusive, but not just inclusive, but also transformative. There has been research conducted through the World Bank's Global Partnership for Social Accountability showing that better transparency and accountability mechanisms have the potential to save more than $100 billion per year in public climate finance, while at the same time ensuring that the finance provision is equitable, affordable, as well as effective. Without this accountability, it is clear that climate finance will continue to risk becoming a broken promise, all well-intentioned, well-announced at these big fora, but very poorly delivered. Accountability does ensure that commitments on climate finance are translated into actual realities where disbursements are channeled to where they are most needed, and it's done in a timely fashion and through inclusive processes. But accountability doesn't just mean that. It also means aligning financial allocation with real needs and priorities. Climate finance cannot be accountable if it's designed in the capitals of the donor countries and the boardrooms, which are far away and detached from local realities. Communities that are living on the front lines of climate impacts know exactly what adaptation looks like for them and can no longer be thought of as just beneficiaries of climate finance. They need to be consulted as partners in financing decisions. They also need to be consulted around project design and its implementation. In summary, we can say that recipient countries and local actors really must have a voice in shaping financial priorities that directly affect them and their livelihoods. With global and national civic space currently shrinking, programs such as the GPSA and its associated community of practice are vital in keeping alive the bottom-up approaches and the notion that civil society actors do have a leading role to play in climate finance and climate action. The platform that we have has ensured that those who face the most risk can have timely access to information, they can influence decisions that impact them, and can make public authorities answerable to them when commitments are not met. It also emphasizes that by strengthening transparency and accountability mechanisms in public budget and policy processes, and increasing the visibility of these systems, civil society can be more effective in advocating for their needs, and new innovative climate finance can indeed be unlocked and channeled to the places and areas that it is most needed. By placing citizens at the center of the climate finance processes, green accountability will ensure that citizens are empowered to ensure the responsible expenditure of climate finance and that they can actively participate as well in climate action through informed decision making. So, while the platform seeks to address issues of accountability across national and subnational levels, across different countries, across different projects. It also, through the community of practice, has and the attendant outreach and engagement that's taken place in this community of practice, has advocated for ensuring integration and institutionalization of civic space in important global political fora. Yes, those may be shrinking, but they still remain important as decision-making spaces. As such, in the bodies such as the UNFCCC, as well as the associated convenings such as the SB 62 June meetings, as well as the climate weeks, we must ensure that the community voices are not only recognized, but given priority and access to decision-making processes. This decentralization and shifting of the balance of power to local-led development will ensure that real change is actualized. We are seeing this play out in real time, for example, where despite the current complex and tense geopolitical landscape, last year developing countries led by a group of students from the Pacific Islands came together to lobby the International Court of Justice into ruling an advisory opinion that recognizes the addressing climate change as a legally binding obligation under the UN treaties. This means that states can now hold each other accountable for damages induced by climate change. This is a significant win for small island states and other vulnerable nations who can now negotiate for reparations from polluting countries. This showcases how small groups of civil society actors can be catalysts in big changes within the international climate justice architecture and even beyond it. At national level, we are seeing governments being held to support institutionalized processes that seek to ensure accountability of national climate commitments through processes such as the submission of the biannual transparency reports under the UNFCCC's Enhanced Transparency Framework. These robust monitoring and evaluation and learning frameworks will ensure long-term outcomes over short-term wins, which is important. It also requires the courage to admit when approaches are not working and when it is necessary for us to change course. Whereas the Green Accountability Platform is now coming to its conclusion, the momentum it has built in advancing accountability of climate finance, we hope, will continue through the partnerships it has built, the systems it has sought to transform, and the relationships that it has supported across implementation partners and members of its community of practice. We're looking to draw lessons that will provide a foundation for scaling innovative approaches and leveraging partnerships to ensure climate finance allocations are equitable, transparent, and seek to serve those who need it most. We at South South North continue to encourage collaboration and learning in this space, and we look forward to nurturing the relationships and partnerships that have been instrumental in the success of this project. Looking forward to interesting discussions with our partners and hopefully continue to chart a way forward in how we can continue to collaborate in this work long beyond the life of the actual project. And we hope that with the work that we continue to do in the community of practice and our engagement with our partners, the work of green accountability can continue. So thank you very much and looking forward to the discussions. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Josh, and thank you for those really amazing opening remarks of how we center this work in what's happening in the global space. And I think also fostering continuation of these relationships is really important and what we're seeking to do. So thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Romy. Romy, as I said, led the development of these publications. So she will give us her reflections on some lessons coming out of that work and an introduction to the case studies. Romy, over to you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks so much for the welcome and Josh for the excellent contextual remarks about green accountability in the climate finance landscape. As Hannah mentioned, I was involved in the development of these two knowledge products, and it was a pleasure to be involved in this project. And it's wonderful to see so many of you on the call, people that we collaborated with in the development of these products. We obviously spoke a lot to the civil society organizations and the case studies that we wrote up. So fantastic that you're here. And for those of you who are yet to read the publications, the policy brief and the case study report, I hope that you find it useful, and I hope that it can offer practical insights that you can take forward in your work. Just to quickly give you a little bit of an overview about the publications, and I hope that it excites you enough to want to read them. But essentially, these publications were developed as complementary knowledge products to strengthen the conversations and the outcomes and the decision-making process around climate finance in all the areas that Josh describes, particularly on transparency, participation, public accountability, and inclusion. And amongst the objectives for these publications was essentially to elevate the role or showcase the importance of the role of civil society actors as core actors in the climate finance governance landscape, highlighting through practical examples and case studies the critical contribution that these actors can make in strengthening green accountability to improve the quantity, quality, equity, and impact of climate finance. The publication reinforces that communities are not passive beneficiaries of climate investments, and that they are essential partners in the delivery, in the design, and the oversight for climate finance. Through the different examples that the publication showcases, we show that when citizens have meaningful entry points into the climate finance processes, climate action becomes more effective, more equitable, and more responsive to local realities. So this in turn will strengthen the bottom-up and locally led approaches and ensure that climate investments are aligned with local priorities and local conditions. The publication also features, the longer report has numerous case studies that we feature, global case studies, and it illustrates how green accountability is practiced across diverse national and local contexts. So it helps to translate the lived reality into actionable policy insights, to move beyond abstract principles towards concrete examples. And we try to strengthen the credibility of the recommendations by grounding them in evidence. And also, we also intend through the publications to support the policy and investment audience decision-making process in identifying what kinds of support civil society actors need in order to partner more effectively in the shared objectives of advancing green accountability. So a couple of key findings that you will see in the report is one, which is it might be very obvious to many of you, but the strong insight around how context fundamentally shapes how climate finance is accessed, governed, and contested. And across the different countries and case studies that we looked at, we observed significant differences in the exposure of climate impacts and the responses, local and national responses to climate change. We also saw a difference in openness of governments and the receptivity for civil society participation, very variable across countries and context. And also, obviously, the existence of formal or informal mechanism that enable civil society and affected communities to monitor, to implement, and to challenge shortcomings where necessary. We also saw wide variation in terms of the access and the quality of participatory processes, as well as the strength and the coordination of civil society actors across the different contexts, and the degree to which gender equality and social inclusion are recognized and embedded in the examples. A clear takeaway is basically that there's no single model for green accountability, that what works in one context may not work in another, and that strategies have to be carefully designed and tailored to the specific circumstances and unique contexts. What was particularly striking was how civil society actors from different countries navigated these constraints and these opportunities and with diverse interventions to overcome some of the barriers. And it'll be very interesting today to learn from some of these speakers. Another finding was the diverse and evolving role that civil society plays in advancing green accountability. And despite obviously operating in different contexts and different environments, the case studies in the report showed that civil society is playing multiple indispensable roles in climate finance governance. We know, all of us in the room are aware that civil society is positioned as a unique intermediary between citizens and the state because of their proximity to communities, their understanding of local realities, and obviously their combined ability to translate complex policy and budget information into a language that is translatable across this technical, accessible language divide. This enables underserved or marginalized communities to understand how resources are allocated, what opportunities exist, and where the gaps potentially occur. Across contexts, again, we see civil society organizations demonstrating a very strong convening role. So in many of the examples that we showcase in our report, you see the role that civil society plays in bringing diverse actors together. So from municipal officials, local government officials, experts, technical experts, traditional leaders, women's groups, youth groups, etc. So these spaces for dialogue have helped to bridge the disconnect between the national priorities where the cases are located and the locally lived realities. And then through obviously a lot of activities, through capacity building activities, advocacy, social audits, policy analysis, and other such activities, the civil society bodies were able to increase transparency, elevate marginalized voices, and push for institutional reforms to strengthen the legitimacy and effectiveness of climate finance in their countries. We also saw many civil society-led initiatives, some such as open budget portals or climate finance tracking tools or citizen observatories and other such tools that are helping embed accountability directly into governance structures. So here these approaches help to provide a practical entry point for governments and for other partners, development partners, and other civil society groupings to help monitor financial allocations, align the spending with local priorities, and to strengthen institutional responsiveness. So together, these examples, and they vary very much, show that civil society is actively shaping the norms, the practices, and the expectations around climate finance. However, as you all know, these gains remain uneven and often fragile, and Josh has just set out a series of challenges that the geopolitical landscape is facing at the moment. And we find civil society organizations continuing to face shrinking civic space, limited engagement, data access, insufficient financing, and so forth. So therefore, there's a need, obviously, to move beyond these isolated projects into a much more systemic, scalable, and connected approach to civil society actors. And our policy insights, our policy briefing gives some recommendations of how we intend to do this. So understanding the constraints that civil society actors face and the strategies that they are going to use to navigate these barriers is very important. And one is obviously collaboration and peer learning, which is obviously one of the reasons we are here today, and platforms such as the Green Accountability Platform, in terms of ensuring that civil society efforts are considered collective, in that obviously when they are connected and more visible, it's much harder for accountability concerns to be sidelined. In closing, I trust that these two research products are useful and exciting, and that today's discussion is a valuable contribution to this shared learning space. And most importantly, I look forward to hearing more from our civil society colleagues that are operating on the ground, and about the innovations and the pathways that they have developed to advance the green accountability in their own unique context. So without further ado, I'd like to say thanks very much for the opportunity to speak, Hannah and others, and please do enjoy the research products. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Romy, for that wonderful overview of what we can expect to read in the publications. And I hope that did encourage all of you to please go have a look. I think you really highlighted very well what some of the diversities and challenges were, but also where some of those learnings are for scaling this work forward. So thank you very much, Romy. If you have any questions for Romy, please do put them in the Q&A box. And I'm sure she will pop her details in the chat as well if you would like to contact her. We're now going to go into our panel discussion, which includes, as I said, some of these organizations that have been supported through the platform, that have done amazing work on scaling accountability approaches for inclusive climate finance. And I'm going to start us off in Brazil and welcome Maria Vitória Ramos, who is the co-founder and executive director at Fiquem Sabendo. And by way of introduction, Fiquem Sabendo's project focused on enhancing transparency and civic oversight by equipping communities to use the access to information law in Brazil, and thereby expanded citizen participation and helped to democratize climate information. So that's a very broad overview of their project. But Maria, if you could, for our audience, please could you give some examples of how this project aimed to overcome some of the barriers to environmental transparency in Brazil, and how, by equipping communities to use the access to information law, how has this influenced the way in which policies in Brazil are currently being monitored and how people are able to access this information?
Thank you, Hannah, for the invitation, and the previous speakers as well. I think it's important to know that we are specialists in the tool, the Freedom of Access to Information tool. And this project allowed us to direct more than 50% of our energy towards climate. So applying transparency tools to the Green Accountability platform. And what we're trying to do here is bring to the public sector the mindset that has ruled the private sector for at least 3 decades now, which is the data-driven decision-making process, right? Stop doing public policy based on vibes and conflicts of interest and start doing it based on accurate, reliable data, so we can actually find the root cause problems and test and scale solutions for those specific problems. And just to start the conversation, I'll give 2 examples of concrete impact that we were able to do towards environmental protection through freedom of access to information. So we built a tool that monitors the the schedules of over 10,000 authorities. And through that, we're able to monitor how lobbying is being done in Brazil. And in partnership with Repórter Brasil, which is an independent newsroom, we're able to show a heavy lobbying towards a pesticide that has already been banned in the US and in Europe due to its tragic results for bees. And through those reportings, we're able to get a national ban on that pesticide. So that was really, really good. And another study that we did was analyzing how much green areas each public school in all 27 capitals of Brazil had, and match that with students' profile, and actually show in numbers and maps how Black students are going to schools with a lot less green areas and less climate resilient schools. And after that report was published, hundreds of local municipal laws were introduced around Brazil to correct that problem. So speaking about transparency and freedom of information in Brazil as a whole, we have a really, really good law, and it works very well in the federal government. The problem is when you go to the subnational levels, right? And most of our work in the Green Accountability Project was directed towards correcting this issue. And one impact story around that is the environmental crimes fines. We, as Josh said, we're falling short of green finance commitments. And a really important source of funding, at least in Brazil, is environmental fines. There was almost 30 billion reais that were to expire for fines that were not collected by the federal government. And through our reporting, and we have a newsletter that goes out to over 20,000 journalists, mobilizing legacy and independent media. And when we showed that information, the federal government was mobilized, and it was able to get court rulings to extend the period they had to collect those fees. And so we saved almost, potentially 30 billion reais just by exposing this to society. So monitoring it's climate finance efficient as well. And then what we realized is that we had the data previously obtained by us for the federal government, but each state has their own fining system. And so we did FOIA requests for all 27 states and got their data for the first time, trying to make a map that not even the government had itself. And then, of course, we realized all the transparency problems, and the big problem when talking about data is the standardization of data across states and municipalities, right? You cannot make a national map because the data doesn't match in a way that you can compare them. So we did a report that we're going to publish this week, showing all the compatibilization problems. And now we're working with each state to correct them and give us a full map so that society can then follow through and make sure those fines are being applied. And now we're also going to use that for we have elections in Brazil this year. And what we're going to do is a profile of all the candidates that are deforestation criminals somehow, and also allow for people to not choose elected officials who are in their private life contributing to the climate crisis. Another point is also tax incentives. A lot of states in Brazil have created specific tax incentives for environmental protection and sustainability, but no one had actually looked at what was being done with the incentives already received in the previous years. And We investigated it in the state of Pará because of COP, but now we did this whole recipe on how to do it in each city, and our community is doing their own investigations for where they live. And through this project, we trained over 300 climate activists, indigenous communities leaders, and now we're working on them on a micro grant basis on how they can apply what they learned in our course on their territories. And it's being very, very interesting. And finally, I'm not sure if I already stepped over my time, Hannah, but
I'll allow you to say your last point, so please go ahead.
all right. We were able to create a work group inside the Transparency Council of the federal government focused on climate transparency. And through that, we're able to give a policy brief that was used to finally approve the SCAZU agreement in Brazil. And that is a huge legacy this project will leave for the future. And now we're working on the transparency of environmental funds in Brazil, so they can be all published and visible in the internet for society to follow through. So thank you again for the project and for this space.
Thank you so much, Maria. Yeah, some excellent interventions there. And I'm so glad I gave you a couple more moments for that last point, because I think it's really important to reflect on that very big achievement. So thank you very much. I see that your website has been posted in the chat. And if anyone has any questions for what Maria has presented on her advocacy tools, lobbying tools, training, please do post it in the Q&A, or we can follow up in the Q&A session. I'm now going to hand over to Tsinia Carranza, who is the Coordinator General at ECHO in Mexico. And by way of introduction, ECHO's project has focused on including historically marginalized communities to participate in the design and validation of climate policies, and has done this through creating participatory governance mechanisms, and particularly has developed innovative communication tools and methodological guides for outreach and engagement, and through that process has capacitated marginalized communities to engage in the climate finance and climate policy space. So Tsinia, welcome. It would be great if you could please share with our audience ECHO's approach in developing some of these very innovative communication and digital tools through this project, and how this has changed who has a voice in climate policy decisions in Mexico, and how government was receptive to this process. Thank you, Tsinia.
Gracias, Hannah. Muy buen día, bueno, buen día, buena tarde, buena noche a todas y a todos. Pues muchas gracias por abrir este espacio para ECHO y poder platicarles de lo que estamos haciendo acá. Bueno, yo les platico que en México ya se aprobó y está ratificado el Acuerdo de Escazú, así también como el convenio de la OIT 169, que son instrumentos de participación ciudadana. Nuestro proyecto se enfocó en cómo lograr que las personas más vulnerables realmente tengan voz y participen en la construcción de la política climática, partiendo del punto de que el cambio climático está vulnerando los derechos humanos y que para poder hacer efectivos estos derechos es indispensable la participación de todas las personas y que la toma de decisiones entonces climático. Bueno, pues en ese sentido enfocamos nuestro proyecto y las desigualdades que se viven en México, pues hacen que México sea un país altamente vulnerable al cambio climático, aunado a sus condiciones de ubicación geográfica y características del territorio. Y esto provoca que tengamos muchísimos eventos climáticos continuamente a lo largo del año. Bueno, pues a pesar de que tenemos estos instrumentos de política pública, como les decía, sigue sin ser efectiva la participación ciudadana, sigue sin haber total transparencia sobre los fondos climáticos y sobre las acciones que se van a hacer. Hay muchas instituciones a nivel federal, estatal y nacional y subnacional que a pesar de que en la ley se habla de la participación, no es un componente que realmente les interese o pongan en práctica, en vista de que esta participación que está en las leyes no es vinculante. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? Que aunque esté en la ley, no es obligatorio. Y muchas de esta participación lo hacen como si fuera una consulta nada más. Y con esto ya avalan de que hubo participación. Sin embargo, el hecho de que te consulten no quiere decir que lo que tú estás diciendo sea considerado. Y ese es el gran problema, que se hacen consultas en donde lo toman como un requisito para poder hablar de que hay participación, pero realmente no se está tomando en cuenta las necesidades y las voces de la gente, y mucho menos de la gente más vulnerable. En ese sentido, ECO, mi organización, nos dimos a la tarea de analizar toda la legislación que hay a nivel nacional para poder identificar cuáles son esos vacíos que hay que fortalecer para que realmente sea vinculante, obligatorio, que se considere la voz de la gente y sobre todo de las poblaciones mucho más vulnerables como son las mujeres, jóvenes, población LGBTQI más, personas con discapacidad, personas de la tercera edad, por mencionar algunos. En ese sentido, lo que hicimos nosotros fue trabajar en primero en una campaña de comunicación que incluyera la voz de todas las personas y fue traducida a lenguas indígenas, porque México pues también tiene una gran diversidad cultural y tenemos 69 grupos indígenas en todo el país y dentro de esos grupos indígenas además hay variantes en sus lenguas. Entonces, para que la información sea efectiva, primero pues se tiene que entender y esta información, hay que primero dar una información clara, accesible, entendible para todo mundo y después capacitar a la gente para que tenga una participación realmente efectiva y pueda tomar decisiones informadas y asertivas hacia sus necesidades. Entonces, en ese sentido, esta campaña de comunicación, bueno, pues se hizo de una manera que pudiera llegar a todo mundo, personas con discapacidad auditiva, por ejemplo. Entonces, bueno, todos nuestros materiales traen subtítulos y con diferentes técnicas para que puedan ser accesibles a todas las edades y a todas las condiciones. Con esta campaña de comunicación se hizo una consulta a nivel nacional y se trabajó sobre las propuestas para la inclusión de estos grupos en la toma de decisiones. Eh, esta consulta, aparte de esta campaña de comunicación, nos ayudó a crear una página web interactiva de participación ciudadana donde se puede encontrar todo el material que hemos trabajado, donde es una página donde se da información y se ponen documentos, hay un blog de participación donde la gente opina, también comparte sus lecciones aprendidas, comparte cuáles técnicas se están utilizando ante diferentes problemáticas. Y otra cosa muy, muy importante es que se logró hacer una guía, un manual, una guía metodológica que hablara sobre qué se tiene que hacer para poder incorporar a estas personas vulnerables en la política climática. Y en este sentido, Bueno, una de las cosas que nosotros consideramos importantes y en lo cual Dios está trabajando y que nos parece que es fundamental es cambiar la ley y poner en la ley que la participación tiene que ser vinculante, obligatoria y debe de incluir a todos estos sectores en la toma de decisiones para construir la política climática y también para construir financiamientos participativos de cambio climático. Esto es decir, que la sociedad participe en la designación de los recursos para que realmente atiendan las necesidades que se están viviendo. En ese sentido también, este, la idea es que haya un escalamiento desde las leyes federales, estatal, nacionales y subnacionales, y que todo esté enlazado para lograr que esta participación venga desde abajo, se construya desde los territorios y pueda ir escalando a los diferentes niveles para que la toma de decisiones en todas las escalas sea de manera participativa y desde el territorio, retomando las necesidades de cada uno de estos grupos y tener políticas diferenciadas en base a las necesidades de los grupos con los que está trabajando. Ahora, afortunadamente, por parte del gobierno federal hay una apertura para trabajar en esto. De hecho, en la nueva NDC 3 de México, la que se acaba de publicar, se habla ya de la participación vinculante y para eso estamos trabajando en modificar la Ley General de Cambio Climático, en donde a partir de esta ley, que esperemos pues quede en la ley y se apruebe, pues al volverse una ley tendrá que ir bajando hacia las otras escalas y llegar hasta lo local, construyendo esquemas de participación de la gente con estos grupos y que se vayan tomando decisiones en cada una de las escalas de gobierno para poder realmente incorporar a la población y sobre todo que la parte del financiamiento se construya de manera colectiva, tratando de que realmente represente las necesidades de la población. Eh, con estos instrumentos eh, se está trabajando, la guía es una guía que está en línea y que la puede descargar todo mundo. Si es necesario, la pueden traducir a las lenguas que ustedes quieran y que pueda ser un esquema que ayude a tomar ideas y que pueda adaptarse a las diferentes necesidades. Y de esta manera podemos institucionalizar estos procesos de consulta y que los gobiernos de manera obligatoria puedan em, tomen en cuenta la participación ciudadana, no como algo que está en la ley, sino como algo realmente importante y lograr que estos comités trabajen de la mano del gobierno para construir la política pública. Eh, Esta guía que ya está en línea, tenemos también em, ya las propuestas de empezarla a aplicar de manera piloto en algunos lugares. Hay una propuesta de está por construirse el Programa Nacional de Adaptación y hemos estado en pláticas con el gobierno de México para que esta guía se aplique en esta construcción y sea un primer piloto y poderla ir ajustando de manera que logremos que por lo menos esta política que ya se va a lanzar este año y se va a construir, pues retome estas propuestas. Eso es en lo que estamos. Nosotros creemos que es fundamental que la participación sea obligatoria por ley para que no dependa de la voluntad política de los gobiernos si quieren o no incorporar a la población y que lo que diga la población realmente sea tomado en cuenta, no solamente sea una consulta, sino que sea una realidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Tania, and a really good example of how the platform is working to advance participation, but not just through a box-ticking exercise, but actually institutionalizing it and getting it mainstream into very important policies. So thank you so much for sharing your amazing work. We've also put your link to your organization in the chat as well. So if anyone would like to contact Cinia, please do so. Building on the theme of inclusion, I'm now going to call on Dr. Zonaziwe from Women for a Change in Cameroon. This project has been instrumental in mainstreaming gender considerations into the climate finance and climate policy landscape in Cameroon, and also has built really innovative multi-stakeholder dialogues to advance this agenda and build a collective understanding of what is needed in terms of integrating gender within the climate space, taking into consideration a range of different stakeholders. So, Zonaziwe, my question to you is, given the current gender disparities and challenges within Cameroon's climate policy landscape, how has your work, specifically through your training materials and your multi-stakeholder coalitions, worked to increase awareness about the needs for gender consideration, and how has this been upscaled into actual policy alignment and decision making? So please do share your insights with us, Dr. Zonaziwe.
Thank you. Good day, everyone, and Happy New Year. So I'll just cue on to what Maria shared for sure. I just like what she said about, holding, policymakers accountable and not letting them, decide whether or not they should inform the public, but rather making sure that, the public is aware of every information. And I was just jumping when she made that statement. I was like, that is, the actions that we actually also at Women for a Change, informed by that, because realizing that climate discussion, climate finance conversation was just happening, and then maybe by accident you just tune on the TV, and then a journalist is just reporting of one meeting that took place, and usually it's always a very closed door discussion. And so with all this, experiences and with all these realities, we thought it was important that we constitute a working group that would specifically focus on monitoring the climate finance flow and just conversation that is happening both at the macro level, and then seeing how that, localize it at the grassroots level. And as a result of that, when we saw the call for proposal, we're like, this is a very perfect opportunity for us at this moment, because this is what we've always wanted. And so our project was particularly just focusing on how we assess and also enhance gender equality into climate finance conversation. And we decided to call the name of our working group CFA, which is acronym for monetary terms in Cameroon, just the way you have the dollar, euro, and yang. So just so we use the acronym each time we're talking about CFA, it also generates and trigger public conversation. What is CFA? So that is, the kind of innovative way we try to localize conversation around climate finance. And the climate finance working group, we began the journey, it's last year, and every month we met at least once virtually to just discuss what are we hearing, what's happening, and how can we better influence and strategically position and monitor and see that conversations that are happening is not just, from a sentimental point of view or what, just a very, neutral point of view, but it needs to really take into account specific needs. Like Josh said, the indigenous community hold over 80% of the biodiversity knowledge of communities. And when we look at those who hold this knowledge, 70% of whom are definitely women. And how can decisions around issues that affect those most affected be made without them being involved? So through these meetings and through these convenings, we're able to just share insight, intelligence, and through that also it got us, we were also able to strategically position ourselves where we got, invited also during some of the deliberations, like when the deliberations around the NDCs were being held in the country. Some of us were invited, to be part of this conversation. And it's just also to let you know that the consortium was made up of diverse group of of person. We have academia, we have civil society, we have those within the private sectors, we have those in the microfinance, because we thought it's important to have the banking sector in this discussion, also trying to debunk the whole grant loans and climate finance from that perspective of loan angle. And the theory of change here was, first increase knowledge. We cannot influence the climate finance without equipping ourselves with the right knowledge, understanding, and what it means. Climate finance definition may vary, but what does that translate to someone who is just a farmer? What is climate finance to them? And also, secondly, ensuring that there is meaningful participation of women and those mostly affected by the climate crisis in some of this strategic discussion. And for sure, also bringing, visibility to what is happening and also holding, power holders accountable. And the climate finance manual currently, which we were able to draft, that informed by our realities, using our own experiences, our examples, and also community experiences to also showcase, when we're talking about climate finance, these are some of the methods, these are some of the ways that you can monitor investment in your communities, in your local council, be it at also in the schools. And if you want to look at it from the national level, these are some of the indicators that you should watch out for. And through that also, we were also able to produce a policy brief, which looks at the intersection of climate finance and a watch, because we also thought it's important that there is that analysis, because we cannot talk about gender equality without also talking about certain key elements which are key factors in communities, for instance, like access to clean water, because most of the communities currently affected by climate change also have experience of drought. And we need to have that correlation and see how local government is addressing it and what chunk of resources are allocated to addressing, ensuring that access to clean water be a priority. And when we talk of access to clean water, what are the gender dimension into that? So these were some of the things that we did over the course of the program, to see that we have that broad spectrum and also localize the concept of climate finance and making it relatable. It should not just be some frameworks that you hear it in the UN corridors, but it should be what does that mean to a market woman? And it's so interesting because I think there was some very interesting examples on how market women would define climate finance, and how that is different from what a schoolgirl would define. But at the center of it, you realize that it's all around accessibility. It's all around security. It's all around well-being. So regardless of how they define it, but you see that there is a common pattern, what people want in terms of ensuring that their well-being and their way of life is improved. And I think overall, I would say through the 1 year period of convening with all these groups of people, it was really interesting to really see that zeal and that enthusiasm and that momentum, to see that this is something that is affecting us. And for sure, as a community, it's very important that we, organize and continue to hold those in key strategic positions accountable, and ensuring that they know that we are also following the conversation, and we are definitely not going to let them rest until they keep to their commitment. So overall, I would just say that is it from from Women for a Change. And even though the project has come to an end, as a group, we still seeing that it's important we just meet virtually, just to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zonaziwe, and thank you for those wonderful reflections. What I really enjoyed about your project and learning from you was how this work really tried to localize the meaning of accountability, and not only through inclusion, but also by integrating those opinions and voices and needs of local women into the conversation. So thank you so much for sharing that. And we look forward also to reading your policy brief. And thank you also for making those linkages between gender and climate, because I think they need to be more pronounced in the conversations that we are having. So thank you so much. I'm now going to move over to our colleague in Senegal, Nindea Sagar, who is a project assistant at Kajust. And interestingly, this project in Senegal focused also on mobilizing communities, looking at community inclusion, but particularly around the just energy transition conversations and funding discussions in Senegal. And some really interesting and innovative work went on around how they convened the communities, how they involved multi-stakeholder bodies and worked with government, but also how they used lobbying advocacies and the local media to advocate for local community needs. So really interesting work. And Indea, I think it would be really useful for you to share with the participants today around your process of community mobilization and how this has and still is ensuring an equitable, just energy transition in Senegal. And then secondly, what lessons do you think that your project can share to other countries and other community groups that are facing similar transition challenges within their local contexts? So thank you, and over to you.
Bonjour à tous, j'espère que vous allez bien. Merci beaucoup Anna, c'est avec beaucoup de plaisir que je participe à ce webinaire. Alors moi, je fais partie d'une organisation qui s'appelle CAJUST. C'est une organisation sénégalaise qui regroupe un réseau de citoyens, notamment des jeunes et des femmes engagées pour promouvoir la justice sociale. Et notre mission à nous, elle consiste un peu à renforcer les capacités et les pouvoirs d'influence des citoyens afin de promouvoir la justice sociale dans la gouvernance des ressources naturelles et le changement climatique. Et nous intervenons principalement dans les axes comme la justice environnementale et climatique, la justice économique et fiscale, ainsi que la justice et équité genre. Donc, par rapport à nous, nous avons vu qu'au cours de la dernière décennie, le Sénégal a commencé à s'imposer dans le rang des nouveaux grands producteurs de pétrole et de gaz. Et ces ressources-là sont largement considérées par le gouvernement comme essentielles pour stimuler la croissance économique et créer des emplois afin d'élargir un peu l'accès à l'énergie abordable. Et cependant, ce choix du gouvernement soulève des inquiétudes quant à la manière d'équilibrer les ambitions économiques du pays avec ses défis et ses engagements climatiques liés à la nécessité impératif de sauver la planète, car l'exploitation de ces énergies fossiles a lieu dans un contexte d'aggravation des effets du changement climatique, ce qui perturbe, mais alors là fortement, les moyens de subsistance des communautés partout dans le pays. C'est dans ce contexte que le Sénégal donc, a conclu en 2023 un partenariat pour une transition énergétique juste, dit GPSA. Ce fonds est d'un montant de 2,5 milliards d'euros et elle vise à améliorer l'accès universel à l'électricité et à soutenir un secteur énergétique inclusif et décarboné. Donc, si aujourd'hui ce GPSA offre une opportunité de faire progresser les objectifs climatiques du pays, sa mise en œuvre aussi suscite toutefois certaines inquiétudes. Et dans le cadre de l'initiative pour nos Green Accountability, nous plaidons pour que la transition énergétique soit juste et équitable. Il est surtout question pour nous de favoriser une mise en œuvre transparente, inclusive du GPSA en veillant à la participation des communautés dans la prise de décision. Et le choix se concentre pour nous, pour le projet Green Accountability, sur les communautés les plus touchées par le changement climatique et les activités extractives, dont notamment les communautés de pêcheurs dans les zones d'exploitation. Nous avons aussi les populations côtières de Saint-Louis confrontées à l'élévation du niveau de la mer et une grave érosion côtière qui ont déplacé des familles. Nous avons aussi les agriculteurs qui ont subi la salinisation des sols dû au climat avec un accès limité à l'électricité, ce qui a beaucoup nuit à la productivité agricole et au stockage après récolte, mais aussi aux femmes et aux jeunes, aux personnes handicapées qui sont souvent exclues de ces systèmes de gouvernance. Et par rapport peut-être à travers notre projet sur la redevabilité verte, qu'a juste à contribuer à garantir une transition GPI plus équitable et responsable au Sénégal. Donc, nous avons réussi à sensibiliser le public sur le partenariat pour une transition énergétique juste en garantissant aux citoyens l'accès à l'information et à des instances de prise de décision. Nous avons permis aux communautés vulnérables aussi d'exprimer leurs revendications en matière de justice climatique. En termes d'engagement et de leadership communautaire, à Saint-Louis, nous avons organisé un forum que les personnes déplacées, pour que les personnes déplacées du moins réclament les processus de relogement plus sûrs et dignes. À Thiès, nous avons soutenu un plan d'action communautaire axé sur la gestion durable des ressources maritimes et agricoles. Et à Fatick, nous avons tenu un forum centré sur les femmes en traitant de l'accès à l'eau et à l'énergie ainsi que les impacts de l'érosion côtière. L'organisation d'un dialogue multipartite à Thiès aussi a regroupé communautés, ministères, élus, entreprises, ce qui a abouti à un pacte social pour une gouvernance transparente et équitable des ressources. Ce pacte comprend notamment un appel à la création d'un fonds de développement local financé à hauteur de 1% du chiffre d'affaires annuel des entreprises pétrolières et gazières. Et en termes d'alliance aussi, nous avons participé activement au comité directeur du GPI et à la co-création d'une plateforme des acteurs de la société civile pour une transparence énergétique juste au Sénégal qu'on appelle le pactage. Et nos actions de plaidoyer ont beaucoup conduit à des engagements du gouvernement pour élaborer une politique climatique nationale et améliorer la transparence en matière d'énergie, y compris le méthane. Et par rapport à la mobilisation, des collaborations avec des humoristes, des musiciens et des radios communautaires ont permis de diversifier la portée de l'initiative. En utilisant des radios communautaires pour faire véhiculer nos messages clés et pour discuter des enjeux dans les langues communautaires. Par rapport aux bonnes pratiques qu'on pourrait partager et qui pourraient être appliquées à d'autres pays, c'est qu'il faudrait avoir une approche communautaire horizontale. Il faudrait aussi qu'il y ait un dialogue social et un rapprochement des communautés avec les décideurs. Il y a aussi une bonne pratique que je voudrais partager, qui est l'accompagnement des communautés dans la maîtrise des techniques de plaidoyer. Parce qu'à chaque fois que nous faisons des activités sur le terrain, nous avons un module qui s'appelle les techniques de plaidoyer et qui apprend aux communications quand, comment et où faire le plaidoyer. Et il y a aussi l'approche participative et inclusive, c'est-à-dire tout ce qui est faire investir ou faire participer toutes les personnes handicapées et surtout les femmes et les jeunes. Il y a aussi l'inclusion massive des jeunes et à la sensibilisation du changement climatique. Et enfin, comme dernière bonne pratique, je peux dire la mobilisation des artistes et des autres acteurs culturels pour faire véhiculer nos messages clairs. Je vais terminer par la dernière leçon apprise, c'est que nous avons noté que la mobilisation d'une masse critique de citoyens engagés et sensibles aux défis climatiques constitue un facteur majeur de changement. C'est pourquoi nous avons misé sur une campagne de plaidoyer de masse qui a permis de toucher une bonne partie de la population. Je voulais terminer sur ces mots. Merci beaucoup, Anna. Je te rends la parole.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ninde, for those reflections. I think there was a lot shared there around both mobilization, but I think also how you tie that into some of the changes in the funding landscape for the JET-P, I think was also very interesting on how we're making those links through this work of tying all these different themes of holding governments accountable, and what different outcomes that those can lead to. So thank you so much for sharing that. A really interesting context, I think, in Senegal with regards to a very specific thematic focus on climate action and climate needs. So thank you for sharing those reflections. I'm now going to move over to our partner from Bangladesh, Mr. Nurul Alam Masood, who's the Chief Executive at the Participatory Research and Action Network, otherwise known as PRAN. And I think this project also has been extremely interesting, particularly with regards to the establishment of participatory rural appraisals. So another process of mobilizing communities in coastal Bangladesh to create these participatory governance mechanisms. But I think also tying into my last point around how this process led to changes in funding decisions, I think was also really interesting. So Masood, for the audience, it would be extremely interesting for us to understand a little bit better around the process that was applied in Bangladesh to mobilize communities to engage in local governance decisions, and then how these mechanisms then led to advocating and lobbying for changes in funding allocations. So if you could share your insights, that would be great. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you very much for inviting me this important webinar today. I think it's a very good opportunity that what we did here and what we learned throughout our intervention is a good opportunity to share our colleagues apart from the world actually. So I am, first of all, I want to give you a context that what I am living or the project actually implementing. You people know Bay of Bengal is the world largest delta. So we have implemented our work in two union parishad. Union parishad is actually lowest tier of our local government. So the both unions situated in the Bay of Bengal actually, Bank of Bay of Bengal. So they have no plan and they can't figure out what climate finance is actually. So what we did, first of all, we generating local evidence through participatory rural appraisal. Then we institutionalization the participation of community through Union Climate Action Forum. We transforming community priority into the plans of local government and their budget as well. We securing formal endorsement of the union adaptation plan, what made by local people, and we also capacitating the local government representative and their bodies to manage climate finance and how they can localize the climate finance and utilize this finance as well. We mobilize a small innovation fund for climate action, and the activity implemented by the Union Parishad as well. We embedding accountability instruments through complaint response mechanism and capacity in the young people of this union to utilize social audit as well. And so what we began actually from the very beginning of our project, we have organized around 18 local rural appraisal in community level, where community people, fisher folk, youth, smallholder, climate migrant, they were participated, and they also try to mapping their climatic hazard and what are the possible adaptation practice they can share in their community people between both union. So throughout their PRA sessions, they developed a union climate adaptation plan. So we have organized a climate action forum, and the forum advocating with Union Parishad to endorse the plan what made by community people. And it was a really tremendous work that Union Parishad endorsed the plan, and before that there were no plan or something like that. So Union Parishad in this fiscal year, Union Parishad allocated around 3 to 3.5% of their regular resource to implement the climate adaptation plan. And at the same time they prioritized their annual development plan to the activity what selected by the community group as well. So later we explore some innovation finance to support the implementation, and plan facilitated expose we actually invite we organize a community meeting in Union Parishad, and we invite some big fields owner, some microcredit organization, some of the other business institution, though who are actually implementing their business activity in this that Union Parishad. So Union Parishad shared their plan to the business community, and they invite that we have a plan. So can you fund us to implement our climate action plan? And I think it was a great job that they managed some funds from some other NGOs and some business identities. I think it's another innovation to manage climate finance. And then we developed we have developed some complaint response mechanisms in Union Parishad, because of when Union Parishad gets some fund from other sources. So the Union Climate Action Forum, they developed a complaint response mechanism to oversee the activities what actually implementing by the Union Parishad. At the same time, there are some vulnerable union as well. So we organize some exchange visit that other part of the Bangladesh where what that community people are practicing to adopt their daily life in changing climate. So these also capacitating the community people to develop their own adaptation practices as well. So I think most important thing of this project was the people's participation to influencing the climate finance decision. And as I told you, that community used PRA evidence and a union adaptation plan to demanded a specific budget allocation to implement their climate action adaptation plan. Union Parishad responded by allocating fund for climate adaptation, budget discussion, and they also invite people for budget discussion as well. Implementation become monitored through social accountability tools. I think this is very important, and community people shifted their positive recipient to active decision maker. And Union Parishad increasingly viewed climate action as a core governance responsibility. I think resilience is one of the most for most outcome of the of governance as well. So what we made, yeah, if I short my speech, then that strong local evidence from participatory appraisal made climate risks visible and fundable. Second, representative from institution, local government institution embedded participation with Union Parishad system. Third, accountability tools such as open budget session, such as participatory plans and budget, such as uh, social accountability tools, compliance response mechanism, build trust and transparency between the community and the Union Parishad. And what we learn actually, what we learn throughout the process, that is local evidence is a form of climate finance leverage. Uh, Plan, if there are any plan, then a plan can create some political obligations. We seen it, and any small budget can unlock the big governance change what happened in our community. And participation is only matter uh, to manage fund resource and shared vision. And external funding is possible if there are any plan. And CSO and CBOs are the most important catalyst to facilitate the climate finance to reach communities and facilitate the local government institution as well. So I believe the thing, and later we have published two policy brief. We have support Union Parishad to print their climate budget. We help them to print their climate action plan, and all the things are available in our website. So I believe this model is scalable, but not yet secure actually, because of there are some capacity gap. We need to facilitate this group along some political change, some and of course limitations of the funding as well. So my final talk is that climate finance work when it is planned, transparent, and accountable. Even a small fund allocated can shift power when community influence decision and monitor the spending and budget line as well. Local government can lead the climate action when people are treated as partner, not as beneficiary, and there should be a plan as well. So I believe yeah, in Bangladesh context, since there is no union climate adaptation or climate action plan, so I think we need to work broadly to capacitate the Union Parishad to prepare and formally endorse the union adaptation plan, and allocated their fixed share to of the budget to implement this plan, and protect this process through mandatory participatory budgeting, functioning compliant response mechanism. So climate finance are these most exposed to climate risks. And lastly, in December 13 and 14, we have organized a national level dialogue, and the most of the elected representatives, they were invited in our session, where our Minister for Climate Change, Secretary for Climate Change, and the other stakeholder, they were invited, and Union Parishad shared their union adaptation plan and the story how they manage very small from other stakeholder. I think this was and that was very very encouraging. And our advisor, she is actually minister now, and she was surprised to see their tremendous work, and she promised that this kind of works need to scale up in every union of the Bangladesh. I think this is the story what we did in Bangladesh. So I'm open to answer question from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Masood. A lot achieved, I think, in a short time frame. And also, I just want to say amidst quite a challenging political context as well in Bangladesh. So I think also your lessons at the end that you shared and where this work is going and how it's translating to more at a national level, a higher sphere of governance, is really amazing to see in this short time frame. And I think a lot to be learned around participatory processes for budgeting. So thank you for those reflections. I'm going to now hand over to our final panelist speaker, Saad Filali from the World Bank, who is a social accountability and stakeholder engagement specialist. The World Bank is obviously the funder of this program, and Saad, coming from your background and expertise, I think a lot of what these case studies have shown is a lot of diverse perspectives and a lot of creative approaches for advancing green accountability within local contexts and amidst very different social and political backgrounds. But I think that they share a common position of advancing and strengthening civil society voices and also improving access to information and building that trust between government and civil society. And I think all of this is also happening against a backdrop of a very complex geopolitical space and a very constrained funding landscape as well. So I think just to end off this discussion, it would be really interesting for you to share your reflections as to where you see the role of civil society evolving within the climate finance decision-making space, and where you see the support of multilateral institutions and governments being the most needed going forward.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everyone. Let me start by congratulating SouthSouthNorth, the full consortium, and the 5 country partners for what you've built through the Green Accountability Platform. It is genuinely inspiring to see how rich this initiative has become, not just in terms of project, but in terms of learning, relationships, and impact. And I was so lucky to be able to join you in Bonn and in Sao Paulo and interact directly with many of you. Climate change might, maybe less prominent in political discourse today, but its impacts are becoming impossible to ignore. We are already witnessing growing physical risks, and that reality requires decisions that account not only for emissions, but also for impacts, dependencies, and adaptation from the outset. In this context, governments and multilateral institutions acting on their behalf are duty bearers. I think it's important to recall that. They must ensure that those most affected are not treated as an afterthought, but are meaningfully included in decision-making, particularly grassroots groups and local communities who are essential actors in implementation. And I, salute here the grassroots, academy, organizers, and especially Huairou Commission with all the work they've done with us, involving and, making sure that grassroots groups are also partners in this work. This is where civil society is indispensable. CSOs empower local actors to participate, organize, and channel their voice, while also contributing directly to practical solutions. They inspire, they bring together local knowledge and global expertise, and through diversity, coordination, and solidarity, they strengthen our collective ability to respond to climate impact, but also to deliver more inclusive social policies. And yet, we must also be clear-eyed. We are seeing a backlash against, I would call it, humanity ideals in many parts of the world. Civic space is shrinking and fragmentation is growing, putting hard-won sustainability progress, environmental justice, and green accountability at risk. I'd like to start by considering three key existential points relevant to our collective interest. First, we are entering a moment where truth is under attack. Doubt is being weaponized, misinformation spread faster than facts, and public judgment forms before evidence can catch up. We see it clearly with land and environmental defenders, labeled sometimes criminals or agitators, even some mainstream media, not just to silence them, but to delegitimize environmental protection itself. That's why verification matters. Without credible information, there is no accountability, and without accountability, there is no environmental justice. I think many of you today, Maria and other colleagues, have been talking specifically about the role of data and verification. Second, our challenge isn't running more pilots, but it's sustaining and scaling what works. I think increasingly, we see civil society innovate and adapt fast, but governments and multilateral institutions must step in to fund, embed, and scale those solutions. And third, AI is moving fast, but the real question is governance. Who benefits, who is protected, and who gets left behind? Responsible AI isn't about slowing progress, but it's building trust, resilience, and impact at scale. As you know, at the World Bank and since the launching of the GPSA and now with CIVIC, we are trying to tackle some of these gaps. Environmental defenders could be positively, even if indirectly, impacted by the environmental and social framework of the World Bank, while scaling innovative pilots and improving AI governance are emerging work streams for CIVIC through our recent project collaborating with Climate Collective and the Global Financial Facility. Now, let me speak on more operational aspects. We've made major global commitments such as adaptation finance, loss and damage, just transition investment, but for many communities on the front lines, climate finance still feels distant, opaque, and out of reach. Too often, people cannot answer the simplest questions: how much finance is coming, where is it going, who decides, and what results are being delivered. As you're showcasing today, CSOs are uniquely positioned to close that gap. You reach vulnerable populations, track delivery on the ground, translate complex finance into local realities, and create the pressure and evidence needed to improve performance. But to play this role effectively, CSOs need governments and multilateral institutions to step up in different ways. First, by providing long-term and accessible financing, not only short project cycles, but sustained institutional support and simplified mechanisms so funding reaches the local actors best placed to deliver results. To tackle this situation, we need stronger, smarter incentives to help drive action and at all levels within society to bring and cultivate change, but also to connect the local and global agenda. We have to address financing as a structural factor, but we also need to integrate other equally important drivers that depend on the whole of society to come together. We need positive narratives on change and aspirations of youth and society, environmental education and awareness, developing resilience together, and building connectivity and solidarity within communities. Many of you are showing us the way today and also have been invested in this work. Second, we have to build capacity for green accountability through training, technical support, and data literacy, so CSOs can interpret budgets, monitor expenditure, and engage credibly with ministers, donors, and climate funds. But also through relationships, because they outlast projects. In fact, long-term relationships, on-site engagements, and peer exchange sustain impact more than short funding cycles ever can. As green accountability partners, you have shown us how you work with public actors in adopting and contextualizing green accountability. We need to scale these efforts. Third, by institutionalizing participation at all levels. CSOs must have a structured seat at the table, embedded within national climate finance frameworks, like the NDCs and national adaptation plans, as well as in global climate finance processes. Country platforms also, under different forms and shapes, are emerging and being supported with the support of WRI, among others, but they need more I found it hard to say, institutionalization. Fourth, radically improve access to data. And I think Maria has talked about this and others also. Radically, we have to improve access to data. Governments should routinely publish climate spending and project data in accessible formats, and multilateral systems must standardize disclosure and treat transparency as a condition of financing. Accountability must be two-way. Communities cannot be the only ones asked to report. This is where governments and multilateral bodies must lead by setting stronger disclosure standards, simplifying access for developing countries, and aligning fragmented climate and environmental governance so resources flow more coherently. Government and multilateral institutions also have responsibility to show how decisions, funding structures, and priorities shape outcomes. And finally, we need to protect civic space and ensure representation of marginalized groups. If women, youth, indigenous peoples, and climate vulnerable communities are excluded from climate finance decisions, we'll be reproducing inequality rather than building resilience. We have to make sure that governments and multilateral institutions build and support systems that ensure feedback is captured from civil society and the most vulnerable groups. This impacts decision-making and contributes to continuous improvement. And finally, philanthropy has a growing role to play. Here also the role of the private sector that we have to engage more. Coordinated philanthropy can move from being an invited participant to a co-creation partner, supporting evidence, strengthening accountability ecosystems, building public benchmarks, and embedding equity and long-term thinking into decision-making. Let me close with this. Sustainability is not ultimately about how many projects continue after funding ends. It is about whether communities own the vision, the knowledge, and the decision-making long after the project cycle is over. The Green Accountability Platform explores this, and it requires multilateral institutions and governments to not just fund CSOs, but to treat them equally as core partners in climate governance. Thank you, and I'll be happy to discuss and bring specific examples during the Q&A. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Saad. I think that was a great way for us to sort of close off the panel discussion. And I think a lot for all of us to think about going forward of how we can keep this momentum going. And I think also interesting for us to watch the space and see how platforms that support civil society advance within this very complex geopolitical landscape and with funding constraints. So thank you for those reflections and also for your inputs. I think the wealth of knowledge that's been generated through this platform was truly instrumental in developing these publications and in pinning down what our key recommendations and learnings have been to advance the role of civil society and make these processes more inclusive. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. I think there was a lot of information. And again, reiterating that this can all be found in these publications that we've produced. We have about a couple of minutes, 10 minutes or so for reflections from the floor or questions for our panelists. So I encourage anyone that wants to ask a question broadly or directly to one of our speakers. You can either unmute yourself or raise your hand and come in directly. But I also do see a lot of participants on this call that are involved in the platform that maybe didn't speak today or are doing similar work on accountability through different projects. So if there was something that resonated with you that you can share from your own work that you'd like to bring into this space, we also welcome that. This is an opportunity for reflection and discussion. So I welcome any inputs. Feel free to raise your hand or post in the chat. Jesse, please come in.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you to everyone who presented. It's so inspiring to see this work and to hear it all brought together. My question is for actually for anyone who wants to, for any of the panelists who want to speak to this, but I would really love to hear how you think this work, especially the collaborative elements of how you worked with other civil society and government partners, can best be sustained in it with resources or platforms in addition to finance. So how can we, what is the type of enduring political support that you think can be can nurture this work, can ensure that the government agencies whom you worked with understand its value that it gives to them, how it builds legitimacy perhaps, or informs how they develop their plans and policies. What do you hope will happen over the next year in terms of the continued political support and recognition for integrating green accountability? And I say that because as I heard in the remarks, there's new tools and new platforms came out of this work, but there's also reference to things like the Escazú Agreement that has been 15 years in the making, right? That we're still working to ratify in many countries. So sometimes it's a return to the platforms and approaches. Governance is frequently cyclical like that and nonlinear. So just would love to hear from anyone who, what are you hoping will make this work endure into the future in the context where you work? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I think that's a really insightful reflection, and I think it's useful for all of us to understand continuation, but also how these changes that have come about through the platform, what do we anticipate going forward, and what is the scaling effect thereof? Maria, please do, come in.
If anyone else wants to speak, but Jesse, I think the one thing that we can continue doing, other than of course funding these projects, is having the international important names like yours and SouthSouthNorth or the World Bank are really useful, trying to convey high-level authorities to listen to us. So perhaps doing events here in Brazil where you would be inviting the authorities, or like the Open Government Partnership does, is it doesn't involve any finance, right? They don't pay for the government or civil society to participate in the commitments. But just the fact that the country has a commitment with an international organization makes them actually work with us. And the actual presence of you is very important. Like for our second commitment to the Open Government Partnership, we asked that there would be a fixed meeting with international representatives from the OGP every 3 months, because when it was once a year or once every 2 years, the government would just stall us for 11 months and try to do something in the last month before they had to speak to those international partners. So just by having your presence would be very useful.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Maria. I think this is something that's actually come up before in conversation. So thank you for reiterating that and giving practical examples. I'm going to hand over to Tsinia. I see your hand.
Hola, ¿sí me escuchan? Ya.
Yes,
Sí.
we can hear you.
Ya, aquí estoy. Bueno, yo considero que hay que trabajar en diferentes niveles. A escala internacional, creo que tenemos que seguir fortaleciendo esta red y difundiendo en todos los espacios, en donde desde los diferentes países y en los diferentes foros internacionales, para que podamos seguir impulsando esta plataforma. A nivel nacional, en el caso de nosotros, consideramos que tenemos que seguir fortaleciendo nuestra relación con los gobiernos a las diferentes escalas, pero lo más importante es fortalecer nuestras alianzas con la sociedad civil y lograr que desde todos los lugares de el territorio se impulse, se dé información, se dé capacitación y se impulsen estos procesos para que logremos que la sociedad exija que se cumplan estos derechos de participación y de toma de decisiones conjuntas con el gobierno en un esquema de gobernanza real y efectiva. Creo que podemos, con toda la fuerza que tenemos desde todos los espacios y todas las organizaciones, podemos lograr esta vinculación y lograr efectivamente que nuestras voces sean escuchadas y que caminemos de la mano hacia construir de manera conjunta esta política climática. Gracias.
Thank you, Tania, and thank you for bringing up the point around coalition building, because that is something I wanted to highlight as well for our participants, is that we've reflected on country level engagements, but we haven't really spoken about how this work helped us to convene collectively at the national level, but then also across countries as well. But I think that was also a key learning of strengthening the civil society networks in country to then lobby collectively as well for their needs and to increase participation as well. So thank you for bringing up that point. Nandea, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Anna. Alors moi, je pense que pour réellement pérenniser ces initiatives, il faudrait d'abord institutionnaliser le partenariat, que ce soit entre États ou bien que ce soit entre organisations de la société civile. Et ce, en signant quoi? Des protocoles d'accord clairs, en intégrant vraiment la société civile dans des cadres formels, en créant des comités de suivi du moins, ou bien avoir des cadres de concertation sectorielle ou des plateformes multi-acteurs comme nous l'avons fait avec le pactage. Il y a aussi une deuxième chose qui est là, qui est la construction d'une confiance basée sur des preuves. C'est-à-dire que l'État doit collaborer durablement quand il voit une valeur ajoutée. Et la société civile, elle peut continuer à produire des preuves ou données crédibles, documenter les impacts à travers les actions que nous menons sur le terrain ou bien proposer des solutions et pas seulement critiquer ou dénoncer, mais nous devons être vecteurs ou porteurs de solutions. Il faudrait aussi clarifier les rôles pour éviter toute rivalité. Je pense que aussi nous devons être ancrés dans la redevabilité dans les politiques publiques. Si aujourd'hui la redevabilité dépend uniquement des projets des ONG, elle meurt quand le projet prend fin. Donc, il faudrait intégrer des indicateurs de redevabilité dans les plans nationaux, lier cela aux engagements internationaux, c'est-à-dire les ODD, climat et gouvernance, et surtout inscrire des mécanismes de suivi citoyen, surtout citoyens, parce qu'il faut vraiment mettre les communautés au cœur de toutes les actions, que ce soit du début à la fin, dans les programmes, dans les programmes publics. Voilà ce que je voulais ajouter.
Very briefly, Hannah, if I may just add quickly, because I see that we don't have a lot of time left. But just on that, and I think my colleagues already talked about some of these aspects, and in my notes also, or my intervention, I try to cover some of this. I think it's really key to diversify and deepen our coalitions in a way to kind of navigate the change that's towards us, but also like what we've been experiencing in the last years. I think we can learn a lot from the human rights movement and what's happening right now in many parts of the world, but also from what they've done in the past to kind of navigate geopolitical issues, as it was, shared by Joss in the beginning. And I see Casey here that from TI, he was TI for a long time. I learned advocacy from Casey when I started as an activist back then in human rights and access to information and anti-corruption, is that more we have diversity, more we have more expertise to navigate these times. And I think we need politics too. We need groups, movements, social movements that have the capacity also to bring our duty bearers, as I said in the intervention, to take care about these issues. We need that pressure. Otherwise, the political system is not going to change. And I think we need ways, as it was said, evidence is important. We need to scale these solutions, but for this scale, we're going to need other partners. And I think diversity is very important. And also, not praising just for our tent, for civil society, it's really important to connect the local, regional, and global to make the movement stronger. Credibility, reputation is important, but that's also part of the verification of information and all the data work that some of our colleagues are doing. I think we can learn a lot from that and integrate it in our way of working and dealing with the change that we are navigating. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saad, and thank you to everyone for sharing their reflections on Jesse's question. I think there's a lot of useful information and a lot of insightful recommendations coming out of this. So thank you once again to everybody. We are running out of time, and I would like to give Ali Rahim from the World Bank a few minutes to share his reflections and close us off for this meeting. So with that, Ali, I'm going to hand over to you, please, for some closing remarks.
Well, thank you to SouthSouthNorth for hosting. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Ali Rahim. I'm the program manager. I had the Global Partnership for Social Accountability and CIVIC at the World Bank, and have worked with many of you on this important initiative. And I think as we come to the close of it, it's just incredible to hear the kinds of outcomes that have been achieved, many of which go well beyond what we expected when many of us were coming together, the leadership at SouthSouthNorth, Jesse from WRI and others. We had a vision for this that was co-created with many grassroots actors. But I think we see both from the on-the-ground results and the systemic effects why this kind of work is important. And I think thus Jesse's question is a key question. What do we need to ensure this work continues? And so much has changed since we were all visioning this. I think we see both in the global north and global south significant questions about, does climate finance and climate action serve economic interests? Does it serve growth and development interests? Does it serve the livelihood interests of individual people? So the social acceptability of climate action and climate finance is in question, and the kind of work you're doing is critical to building that. So it doesn't just go to delivery, it doesn't just go to accountability, it goes to the very viability of climate finance as a societal enterprise. And so I think this is a key sort of next step for us to build out. I mean, I look at some of the things, Maria and I have met many times over the years, even before she joined the platform, and many others of you. And for her to just casually say the approval of the Escazú agreement was part of an outcome of work that was funded, to me is just incredible. It just shows the depth of what can happen when the right small amounts of finance and the right catalytic networks are put in place. So I think that's something important we really need to distill from the work, seeing that these small individual effects, the disaggregated effects of getting information to people, building their advocacy capacity, building their oversight capacity, building mechanisms for communities and civil society organizations to formally intersect with government. I think of the fact that in Senegal, in the JEP working groups, it's only the civil society working group that continues to sustain itself as a formal structure, or in the natural mangrove restoration program there that was also supported, that this suddenly becomes a key mechanism for delivery and implementation. All of these, in the Bangladesh work we heard about earlier today with the Union Parishads and a model becoming And participatory rural appraisal has been a key tool in development for a very long time, but hasn't been systematically leveraged for something like climate finance, and really can be integrated into government systems, especially when we talk about the challenges of last mile delivery. So I would close to think we need to think of trust and these grassroots mechanisms as a core delivery infrastructure for climate finance and for finance in general. And we are at a crisis moment. Saad was getting to this. The world has changed so dramatically. A lot of the finance that was flowing to the social sector actors that do this work has been cut substantially. And the only way to build a future is to move from a mindset of funding to a mindset of finance. We need to bring climate justice action, the kinds of networks on the ground, in collaborative concert with a lot of these formal mechanisms that are private and public, and use them as scaling agents and see this. And so I think there's a critical role for institutions like the World Bank, but it's a challenging time. I would call on all of you to sort of raise your voices and come together. This is the political question that Jesse was raising, and think of how we all together can amplify and build a narrative about why this work is just so critical to the outcome pathways that still remain as critically important today as they did several years ago, or as they did since the Paris Agreement. So thank you to all the partners for the incredible work and determination and delivery. The outcomes here have exceeded our wildest expectations. And to Josh, I don't know if Shanaz is here, to Hannah, to Jesse, to all the folks, Glenn, I don't know if Glenn is here, Huairou Commission. We're going to do a series of events closing this out, but we're all very committed to keeping this community of practice alive. So however we can do it, we will find resources, we will use our convening power. So even if the project and platform is ending, we all intend to keep this work alive. And so give us your ideas how we can help with that collectively, because we all have something we can do that's distinct. So thanks to all of you. And I'm glad I could tune into the last hour of this workshop. Sorry, I missed a little bit of the earlier part. And thanks for the opportunity to say a few words at the end. And we're just so grateful for all the work that everyone has done.
Thank you, Ali. Excellent way to end this off. And yeah, we look forward to seeing where these relationships and where the momentum takes us. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for participating. Thank you to all the partners involved in the consortium and beyond. And also to our interpreters online today for your very excellent interpretation services. It was very clear. So thanks all, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, SSN. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.